Hello, and welcome to our audience. This is a podcast produced by the Global Philadelphia Association on a subject of fundamental importance to every person on the planet: the Sustainable Development Goals that were announced by the United Nations in 2015. My name is John Smith, and I have the pleasure of moderating a panel of three outstanding people who will discuss the goals, what they are, where they came from, and why we need to pay attention to them. Our panelists include Kira Kaczynski, who is a member of the Global Public Policy team of the prominent accounting and business consulting firm Deloitte LLP. Welcome, Kira.
Thanks, John. Delighted to be here.
Sophia Becker, a senior at Friends Select School in Center City, who has a strong interest in social justice issues, and who co-founded an organization at the school with an interesting name, SKEES. Interesting name. Welcome, Sophia. I hope we'll hear more about your organization shortly.
Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here.
And Matt Lobach, who holds the title of Director of Sustainability at Hersha Hospitality Trust, the owner and operator of hotels nationwide, including the Rittenhouse Hotel and the Westin Hotel here in Philadelphia. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Kira Kaczynski, let's start with you. Could you tell us a little about your background and what Deloitte's Global Public Policy team is all about?
Sure, John. Thanks. So I work on global public policy and lead our inclusive growth topic. And through that, I work a lot with our global stakeholders, including organizations like the United Nations, as well as the G20, APEC, OECD. But I'm really focused on inclusive growth. What does Deloitte feel, and what are our stance on policies and advocacy and informing those institutions on inclusive growth?
Now, you've used that expression a couple of times. Tell us what inclusive growth means.
For us, it means an economy, whether it's a business, a government, a city, that grows for all, that includes everyone, and that includes all things. So not just financial growth and economic growth, but truly inclusive growth that is about social progress and inclusiveness for everyone.
Perhaps you could start the discussion off this morning by describing what the Sustainable Development Goals are.
Sure. I think the United Nations will tell you that the Sustainable Development Goals are a blueprint for peace and prosperity. The UN Secretary General Guterres will say that the Sustainable Development Goals underpin the basic mission of the United Nations, which is achieving peace and security in the world.
So, if I understand correctly, they're about not just saving the planet, but also enhancing the opportunity of all people to be prosperous.
Correct. There are 17 goals with 169 indicators and over 300 targets. So they're quite ambitious, and they cover everything from poverty to climate to gender equality. They are all very interconnected as well. So one goal might be reflected when you talk about gender equality. You might also talk about education, which is another goal, and the importance, for example, of educating girls and women. So they're quite vast. They truly cover everything that will bring us to a better planet and a better people and better prosperity for all.
Some of them are very ambitious, aren't they? What about the first two?
Well, the very first two are probably the crux of all of them, which is about ending poverty and ending hunger. And so a lot of them really underpin the root causes that are needed to truly end poverty around the world.
I seem to recall that in the year 2000, something called the Millennium Development Goals were announced. What were they, and what became of them?
So the Millennium Development Goals, there were 8 goals, and they were set in 2000 in the Millennial with the goal of achieving them by 2015. And they were really created behind closed doors by the United Nations for countries that were developing and emerging. And they were really set to them to try to do the similar things: end poverty, end hunger, improve maternal health. They were small and concise, and we did okay. By 2015, poverty had halved. More people had clean water. So they were valuable, they were guideposts, but they were really for just a select group of countries to help them come into the developed industrial economies.
So are the Sustainable Development Goals different in that respect?
Yes, they're very different. So the Sustainable Development Goals were created in a more open platform. The UN opened up to everyone and took input from civil society, citizens, business, asked people, what do you care about? What's important to you in your societies? And how do we essentially make the world a better place? And so that inclusion got us to, in some ways, many goals, 17 instead of 8. But really, again, to look at those root causes of things like poverty and how can we all come together on these things. So they were much more inclusive. They are also for everyone this time. They are not a set of goals that are just out there for developing countries. Every nation of the United Nations, 193 countries, signed on to these goals and has committed to them. So they are truly for everyone, including the United States, which is a signator and has not pulled out of them.
So when the goals were issued by the UN, who was it that was envisaged to be responsible for carrying them out?
Initially, the United Nations, when they create something like that, it is really for governments. It is how should governance achieve these goals, and the indicators and the targets are truly for governments to report on, to say how they're doing. The targets are really truly for governments and nation states.
Does business have a role in all of this?
Absolutely. I think that business, there is in fact a new goal, which was quite unique for the UN and in their opening up to not just civil society, but also business. Goal 17 is embracing partnerships. And I think the United Nations realized that you cannot grow without business, that business helps to create markets, they help to create prosperity. And so absolutely business has a huge role to play in this, as well as how business operates. Many of the problems today, we all know, came from businesses doing the wrong things in the past. So they're absolutely for business, and I believe business has truly embraced them in that same way.
Now, most people think of companies in the private sector as being in the business of making a profit. So has that been changing?
I think that's changing significantly. One of the things, stories I like to tell, that when the goals were announced in 2015, Pfizer on 42nd Street, right next to the United Nations, plastered the global goals on the side of their building. So they had truly embraced the global goals. You would have thought that they might have even been Pfizer's, but in fact, they are not. They are for everyone and all businesses. I think we're seeing a trend in business that they care about inclusive growth and sustainability. Deloitte did a study a couple of years ago with Forbes. We surveyed about 350 executives at the vice president level and above globally. And the number 2 most concerning business issue for all these executives, after keeping up with technology, which we understand is a challenge for everyone, the second most concerning issue was inclusive growth and sustainability. They are on top of the strategy agenda for all businesses. We also found that 96% of these businesses supported the Sustainable Development Goals, even though only about 17% thought they had programs to actually help the Sustainable Development Goals.
How are is progress measured in trying to reach these goals? And by the way, what is the current aspirational deadline for achieving all of them? When will that be?
The goal is 2030 to achieve the goals. That's the target set for the. So they often call them the 2030 agenda is what they're often called. But in fact, things are not looking fantastic. They're really challenging goals. Reporting is difficult. Like I said, 169 indicators, 300 targets makes it challenging to report on them. Although there are proxies you can use to report on the goals. Deloitte has a partnership with something called the Social Progress Imperative. It was started by Michael Porter up at Harvard, and they release every year a social progress index for 143 countries. And this can be already mapped the SDGs so that you can give governments scores on how they're doing on the SDGs. And when they look at the world as a whole, what they've seen, in fact, is that we probably will not achieve the SDGs until about 2073. So, 40 years behind our target. So we're falling behind, and we have quite a challenge ahead.
Well, we're fortunate in having with us today Sophia Becker, who is a senior at the Friends Select School and a member of one of the younger generations that's looking at how well or how poorly we're doing in carrying out the goals. So I'd like to turn to you, Sophia, and hello again.
Hello.
And I'd like to have you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you are doing.
Yeah, so I'm Sophia. I'm a senior at Friends Select School located right in Center City, Philadelphia. We're a few blocks away from City Hall. So I've been at a Quaker school since kindergarten, and I've spent a lot of time. We focus, like a heavy focus of our schooling has been social justice and things very similar to these goals. And part of being brought up in that, my friend and I co-founded this committee, SCEAS, which John mentioned earlier. It stands for the Student Committee for Extracurricular Education. I know it's a mouthful. And our mission is to educate our peers about globally minded issues that aren't covered in our curriculum that we note are very important when we leave school to be aware of. And so last year we decided we wanted to talk more about Puerto Rico through bringing in speakers and other programming, especially after Hurricane Maria, when we started popping up on the news more, and we began to wonder how exactly it was related to the United States, why we didn't really understand that relationship. And so that's a lot of what we've been focusing on. And throughout the school, there's a lot of focus on social justice issues as clubs, committees, because it's just what we've been raised with.
Do you bring speakers to come to the campus and talk to your students?
We do, yes.
And do you have any lined up so far?
Yes, November 4th is our first one for this year. We're covering the Middle East as our topic for the year. And our first speaker is Yaroub Al-Obaidi. He is a global guide at the Penn Museum and has done work throughout Philadelphia. He's an Iraqi refugee who's going to be coming to talk about his experiences as an Iraqi, talk about Iraqi history, culture, and his experiences in Philadelphia and how he connects the two places.
Now, we've been talking about the subject of sustainability. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your interest in sustainability and how you and your friends look at that subject.
I mean, it's definitely something that's on all of our minds very frequently because it's such a big impending issue. And we do our best to promote and support it, especially with the climate strike that happened just a few weeks ago. Almost every student in the high school and middle school left to protest for the day. And we also try to do our best to support businesses that support sustainability. And whenever there's an opportunity to talk about social justice issues within school, we are always on board to do that and to promote that conversation.
I think many people are aware now of a young woman named Greta Thunberg from Sweden who has been at least a spokesperson for how younger people look at the importance of preserving our climate. Another example, I guess, of younger people beginning to take action. What do you think your generation should do? Should you speak up more? Are you content to leave it to the older members of our society to carry the ball? Where does the younger generation come into this?
I think for the most part, we do believe that this is something that we're really going to have to carry. Greta Thunberg said it herself, the older generation. Many of them are definitely trying, but it's kind of been a failure to some extent. We have a lot to work towards. And I think you do see that in youth. Whenever there's a chance or an opportunity to protest, to talk to representatives of the government, we always try to mobilize as much as possible to support any movements that seem to be working towards these SDGs.
Well, why would climate change be of particular importance to Generation Z or to the Millennial generation?
Well, it's going to affect all of us, and especially as it keeps getting progressively worse, we're the ones who are going to have to deal with those effects in the economy, with food supply, and it's hard to avoid in any space. And even though we don't necessarily see it now, we know it's coming, and we know that it affects different societies differently and just different communities depending on your access. And so that's something that we definitely see coming.
Now, you also mentioned gender equality, which I think is the fifth of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Is there a special relationship between Friends Select School and that goal?
There is. Just a couple of weeks ago, the first mural of the SDGs was hung and unveiled at our school. Global Philadelphia has sponsored a campaign to hang murals throughout Philadelphia of the SDGs to remind our community and uphold these goals. And so we were really happy to have Friends Select as the first one with the gender equality mural.
Yes, it's a marvelous painting by a Philadelphia artist named Barbara Smolin. It's quite striking. So it's probably unfair, but we keep referring to your generation somehow as a whole, as Generation Z. Can you describe a little bit more whether the feeling that you have and that your friends have are feelings that you think your entire generation shares?
I think we definitely do. It's so many of these issues that are addressed by the SDGs are very impending. We know they're going to affect us in our lifetime, and if not, in our children's lifetimes. And it's so hard to avoid thinking about that it's something we're always considering and trying to work towards.
All right. I'm going to ask you now to put on your hat as a shopper, as a consumer.
Happy to.
Okay. And as you go about deciding what shops or what companies to patronize, does it ever occur to you to pay attention to what their attitude is towards sustainability or the Sustainable Development Goals?
It definitely does. I mean, when we hear that a company is abusing human rights or is extremely unsustainable, there's definitely a push to not shop there and to not give them business. And then when companies try to achieve these goals, are working towards more sustainability, you definitely feel better when you shop there and you want to patronize them. Although I do note that, especially when we go to Center City, Philadelphia to do our shopping, it's very hard to find places that are both sustainable with like the materials that they use, but also treat their workers equitably. There tends to be either one or the other, and it's hard to find a place where it's just that right hot, like sweet spot in the middle. And so we do our best, but.
So if a company or a shop or a chain did a better job on both those scores, would that affect your buying decisions?
It definitely would. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I'd like to turn the conversation now over to Matt Loback. Matt, you're in business.
That's right.
You've been listening to Kira, who at Deloitte is in the business of consulting with corporations and others. And you've been listening to Sophia, who describes how she and her colleagues and contemporaries are looking at it. How is Hersha Hospitality Trust responding to all of this?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And, for Hersha, sustainability has always been an integral part of their business. And so actually in 2010, we created what's called the EarthView program. It's Hersha's internal sustainability program. It's rolled out to all of our hotels across the country. And really our approach with the EarthView program is to take a triple bottom line assessment of our initiatives to make sure that we're having impact not only on our financial bottom line, but also on our environmental and communities as well.
Do you see a conflict between the imperative to make a profit on the one hand and to do good on the other?
I think that's a common thought with many people. I think if done correctly, sustainability is good for business. And, for Hersha, our EarthView program has, on the financial side, being very socially and environmentally conscious, right, on the financial side, that is translated into $65 million of value for the company. And that comes from a number of factors.
All right. So if I were to stay at one of your hotels, how might I notice the fact that Hersha has this orientation toward sustainability?
Yeah. I think a lot of people associate sustainability at hotels with a towel conservation or towel reuse program. I think unfortunately for a lot of hotels that don't have a sustainability program, that is their sustainability initiative. But at Hersha, we take a very different approach. Our core Earthview program that's rolled out to all of our hotels is a set of 14 initiatives, and that's applicable to any hotel, any region, any brand. And, that ranges from everything from LED lighting to, engagement in the community, initiatives for engagement, to recycling programs throughout the hotel, and also touches on another aspect that I think a lot of people associate with hotels, which is these little bottles of shampoo and soap. And so typically those get thrown out after every guest stay. So what we've done is our hotel teams collect all those partially used bottles of soaps and shampoo. They collect them, they send them to one of our partners, Clean the World. And Clean the World takes those soaps, sanitizes them, repackages them, and then sends them to areas around the world where there's a lot of hygiene-related illness and even death. And in those communities, 2 of the top 5 leading causes of death in children under 5 is hygiene-related. And simple hand washing can reduce that by 50%. So since the start of our program with Clean the World in 2011, we've been able to donate enough soap to create 500,000 new bars of soap for communities in need.
Well, now you've heard this morning Sophia talking a little bit about how her buying decision and the decisions of her friends can be affected by whether an organization is environmentally responsible, socially responsible, and so on. Is that one of the motivating factors for Hersha?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and certainly something we're seeing more and more, and especially, the millennial generation, they're very interested in experiences, not just a box with a bed in it that they can stay in. So we're definitely seeing that giving an opportunity for experiences really is driving some of our business. And in fact, that's extending not only to leisure customers, but also to corporate bookings, where 80% of our questionnaires that we receive about corporate bookings are asking about our sustainability program. So they're using that information in part to make a decision of whether they're going to stay at our hotel or not.
So some of your most sophisticated business clients, so to speak, are paying specific attention in their siting decisions when they consider one of your hotels.
Yes, very much so.
Now tell us a little bit about whether there are other ramifications of the Earthview program. And I'm interested to know whether or not your own employees have a view of this and whether any of them are happier working for a Hersha Hospitality as a result of the fact that they can be associated with programs like Earthview.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and certainly our sustainability program has allowed us to attract and retain more talent across our hotels and at our corporate offices. I think programs like I mentioned, the Clean the World program, hotel teams get really excited about that. They're talking about that all the time because they can think about the impact that they're having, not only on their jobs, but for sustainability. And I think that really resonates with people. And I remember when we first started rolling out this program, this was back in 2010. This is before it was hip and cool to have sustainability integrated into businesses and into hotels. And so, a lot of the time we were introducing this new concept, this sustainability concept, and here's the initiatives that you have to do as part of the program. It was a very much directive program at that time. And what's been really inspiring since then is really seeing the hotel teams starting to embrace sustainability and understanding how what they're doing impacts beyond just their immediate role and has a global implication. So we're really seeing engagement, I think, folks want to work for companies that are, to your point, environmentally and socially conscious.
So, Kira, it sounds like one company is paying significant attention to the Sustainable Development Goals. What's your observation about the overall corporate interest as you see it from the perspective of Deloitte?
Yes, John, I think the interest is wide and crosses many sectors and industries. I think, as I've said, since the Sustainable Development Goals were launched, I have been walking around the United Nations for nearly 10 years now in different roles that I've had, and I see increasingly business showing up, wanting a seat at the table, wanting to talk about these goals, wanting to show what they're doing, how they're contributing. In fact, there's a fantastic website from the U.S. Council for International Business called Business 2030. So, for example, Matt, you might have some of your programs on there for HRSA, and it highlights by SDG what different businesses are doing. There's a great example in there of a Danish company, Novozymes. It's about a $2 billion biotech company, and they have mapped their entire business strategy to the SDGs from start to finish. So it's very exciting. I also think most recently the Business Roundtable letter from the CEOs that are U.S. CEOs that are member of the Business Roundtable have signed on to say that business needs to do more than just have profit as a purpose. They need to have a larger purpose in all that they do. So I do think there is wide in general across the business industry of people embracing this, businesses saying we can do better. And again, because it affects the bottom line. It's not a difficult decision when you start to look at the numbers. There's great examples of companies that are doing cost savings by being more sustainable, like HRSA's doing.
How's this global public policy focus at Deloitte been good for Deloitte?
Yes, absolutely. Our CEO is one of the signatures of the Business Roundtable, much like some of the CEOs here at Comcast, where we are, Aramark, Vanguard. And so absolutely, this is a priority for us, for our CEO, for our global chair. She's very committed to sustainability as well. And so it permeates everything that we do. We, in fact, have initiatives around purpose. A lot of what I work on are our public interest metrics, how we as an organization show that we operate in the public interest. And we don't make a product. So we're a unique organization. It's all about our people. So how can we show that we operate in the public interest? How can we show that we live our purpose in all that we do? And a lot of that is our business decisions, who we do business with, how we operate, that sort of thing. So it really permeates the entire organization in addition to how we interact and leverage these SDGs. I think at Deloitte and other businesses, I see the SDGs as a call to action, a real common language, which has been particularly helpful to business so that we can pinpoint these different issues. And business can look at the SDGs and say, oh, we're working on gender equality. We have an initiative to, for example, at Deloitte, to increase the partnerships, to have more gender equity in our partnerships. Who are the owners of the firm. Or you can point to education. We do a lot in our program called World Class on skills and upskilling, preparing people for the fourth industrial revolution. And other businesses too. I'm sure if Matt wanted to sit down, we could map through the HRSA value chain and see what HRSA's doing around the SDGs in every part of their business. So I see it as this kind of common language for us to talk about what we're doing and what we're working on, what needs to be worked on. But then it also expands from business to civil society, to citizens, to folks like Sophia, so she can see what's happening. What do I care about? What do I want to work on? And how am I helping to solve these problems? So I see the SDGs as even larger than just this is a really important thing that we do, but really a common language and call to action for all of us to come together to solve these huge problems facing humanity and the earth today.
Certainly is a very big and major reason for the SDGs. Now, Matt has described that following the SDGs and working on them with a will has been good for HRSA. It's been an attractor of corporate business, among other things. So let me ask the question of you. Has your involvement, Deloitte's involvement generally, with the Sustainable Development Goals been good for Deloitte in terms of attracting clients?
Well, I would say for us, it's somewhat clients. I think business, has been slow to come on board until recently on the SDGs. For us, it's a lot about our talent. It goes back to our discussion about millennials and Gen Z. Because we are a business consulting firm, a service-based organization, our biggest priority is our people. And so while it is important we're a B2B, we work with other businesses, so we are not going after consumers in our clients, but we have to attract and retain the best talent. And that talent today cares about how business operates. To Sophia's point about her purchasing decisions, that once you go to college and get off into the working world, it's going to matter where you work. Does that business hold the same values that you have? Are they authentic? Do you believe that you have a purpose when you go to work? So for us, I think at an organization like Deloitte, it really permeates into our talent and our organization, and that people are motivated and want to work there and want to stay there.
So I think most people understand that a business is only as good as the quality of its people. And I hear you saying that this is a major factor in Deloitte's being able to attract the high quality talent that you need to do business and to prosper. Sophia, you've been listening to this. We have two people who are quite familiar with the business world, and they are suggesting that this is a feature that would appeal to you and to your generation as you consider your employment options in the future. Is that something you would take into account?
It's definitely something I would, especially now we start focusing more on the way that we're going to achieve these SDGs is less of just, we should personally recycle. Of course, that's helpful. But we finally reached this point where we realize that corporations are really the thing that's going to make the change. And so to be part of that and have a choice in how corporations do these things and to choose the places that we want to work where we feel like they support these goals is something that will definitely be important to us going to the workforce.
Well, this discussion of the Sustainable Development Goals has been very inspiring, and it sounds like they make a lot of sense both socially and from a business perspective. So why haven't we already accomplished them? Is there some challenge out there that we need to be aware of? Kira, maybe you'd start and tell us a little bit about whether these goals are going to be easy or hard to bring about.
John, I absolutely think they're going to be really hard. There's no doubt. As I mentioned earlier, using the Social Progress Index as a proxy, we see that we're not likely to achieve them before 2073, long after our target goal. And in that same analysis, what we've seen in 143 countries, if you sort of take countries and group them by their GDP, with the U.S. as part of the G7, the U.S. is the only country since 2014 to actually regress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's a concern if we're actually regressing. There's also concerns that France and Germany are moving very slowly. So absolutely, these are challenging and difficult goals to achieve. I think the other thing that we see when we look at the goals and sort of assess how we're doing on things like water, hunger, poverty, sanitation, we see that our biggest challenges are actually in something like Goal 16, which is about rule of law and human rights. That is absolutely the toughest goal. The targets are tough. It does include sort of what I call getting rid of the bad guys, whether that's anti-corruption, bribery, illicit arms. There are some great things in there that are major things we have to combat in the world. But many of the other goals I think that we can achieve, we just need the will and the investment to do it. As Matt said about clean water, we know what to do. We know about healthcare. We know about eradicating disease. Our challenges, I think, will actually be in those areas around rule of law, freedoms of speech, inclusion, all these kind of things. So we have a very tough road ahead, there is no doubt. But I believe that because of this embrace from business and others, that we can get there.
Sophia, you've said in the course of our conversation that you are looking to the older generations and to the corporate community to do a better job. I wonder if you have any criticism or concern about your own generation, Generation Z. Are there challenges there in making the Sustainable Development Goals happen?
Yeah, John, I think there definitely are, because while we all are aware that they need to happen, there are different scenarios where it's just easier not to work towards it, where especially we've been talking a lot about consumerism. Even though we might know that a company does not treat its workers fairly or is incredibly unsustainable, it's cheaper sometimes, and that's something where people are like, well, I'm just going to go there anyway. And then that support for those businesses only encourages the way that they act, and it is this kind of push and pull between trying to support businesses that we want, but also sometimes not having the initiative to put our money towards that when it seems harder.
I know sometimes when I'm faced with a broad and difficult job, one that requires work on the part of lots and lots of people, it's easy for me to say, well, I'm too busy today, or somebody else will take care of it, or that's not really my job. Do you sense that attitude exists among some in the generation that you are part of?
A little bit. I think a lot of it is that we know it's going to end up on us, but it's such a big issue where the way I think of it is that the only way we're going to change it is if we all devote our entire lives to fixing this, and that's a lot to think about when that's the only way I can personally see a way out of it. And it's pretty exhausting to think that that's how much commitment is needed from each person.
So, Kira and Matt, we're hearing that this is a generation that needs us to do better, do more, but it's not necessarily easy even when you intend to do better and do more. Perhaps, Matt, you could speak a little bit to the whole issue of the challenges that a business faces, or the business community as a whole faces, as it tries to address these issues.
Yeah, I think to your point, John and Sophia, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work, and even when the vision's there to actually get from A to B, it takes a lot of time and takes a lot of buy-in from everyone involved, all stakeholders. And so, we're fortunate that our CEO Jay Shah and executive team are, highly engaged in sustainability. But that's not the case everywhere, and there's still challenges. And going on with implementation, and to Kira's point about it doesn't all just fall on the back of businesses, and I think that that's true. And what are governments doing as well? And one of the challenges for us, and I think one of what's turning into one of the benefits in trying to achieve the goals is regulations that are coming out, that are affecting our business and every other business. New York City just came out with the Climate Mobilization Act, which will require all buildings in New York to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by a certain threshold by 2024, and then an even more aggressive threshold by 2030. And there's fines if you don't meet those thresholds. At the same time, the state of California, has decided they're going to ban those little plastic bottles of soaps and shampoos by the year 2023. So, there is motion happening. Are we going to get to the goals in time? I agree. I think it's going to be quite a challenge, but I think that's what we're faced with.
Kira, we've had a wonderful conversation about the goals generally. Would you describe, as best you can, how they're being addressed on a global level today?
Well, John, I think it varies. Every country has embraced them differently. As we said, we're seeing some slipping backwards in the U.S., but we're seeing other countries embrace them, aligning strategies. You'll see, I believe it's in Costa Rica, they've aligned their country planning and a lot of their development to the SDGs. There are these voluntary national reports that happen where countries voluntarily report on how they're doing on the SDGs. Not every country has done that. I think our biggest challenges are the biggest countries, the U.S., China, Russia, Brazil. what are we all doing? They're certainly well embraced in, for example, the European Union. There is a lot of social progress indices there looking at European Union regions and aligning them to the SDGs and helping them to make decisions on where to invest so that there is success throughout the entire European Union. So there's a lot being done globally, but again, it varies. I think that there are more and more cities increasingly saying, hey, we can do something about the SDGs. We don't have to wait for our federal government to do something. So that would be the next step as we see increasingly more cities adapt strategies around the SDGs.
Right here in our backyard in the city of Philadelphia, there have been various initiatives, one involving our mayor. Matt, could you describe what that consists of?
Yeah, sure. So, the city of Philadelphia has what they call the GreenWorks plan, which is basically their plan for sustainability over the next several years. And, obviously that's endorsed by Mayor Kenney. And Mayor Kenney was actually at the C40 World Mayors Summit in Copenhagen earlier this week. And so, that's a meeting of mayors from different cities that are working together to really share best practices on how to reduce greenhouse gases and help improve climate resilience in their cities.
Sophia, you spent some time this past summer interning at the Global Philadelphia Association. Maybe you could describe a little bit about what it is doing to enhance global awareness.
Well, one of the main things Global Philadelphia is doing in Philadelphia is this campaign to have the SDG murals throughout the city as a reminder of what we're trying to achieve. But then also as more broad goals, Global Philadelphia tries to protect the heritage of Philadelphia, and these goals are so intertwined with that. And so by uplifting different corporations and organizations that are also supporting these goals, working towards them, that's some of how Global Philadelphia tries to do it.
Thank you. Well, let's go around the table and ask a question that hopefully is on the minds of the people who are listening to us, and that is, what could I do? What could we do to support sustainable development here and around the globe? What can I do sitting in my own living room or at my own workplace or out and about? What could I do to make sustainable development happen here in Philadelphia and more broadly? And Kira, I'm going to start with you on that.
Well, I think as citizens, we certainly can do several things. We can hold our governments accountable. So it's not just about what we do personally and the choices that we make about consumption, about our own recycling, but also holding our governments and business accountable and saying that these things matter to us because these are our lives that we are protecting and our planet. So I think as citizens, there's a lot we can do to engage to help to achieve the goals, not just in our individual decisions, but in who we vote for, how we choose to spend our money, with what businesses, that sort of thing. So there's multitude of things that we can do and get involved in. I think that there's also the SDGs embrace partnerships. SDG 17 is about monitoring and the accountability of the goals and measuring them, but it's also about partnerships, public-private partnerships, partnerships with civil society. So there are many ways where we in our private lives, in our businesses, can get involved to help support the SDGs.
If I hear you correctly, the message is we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
Sophia, what is it that you think our listeners could do, should do, to promote the Sustainable Development Goals?
I think especially from a youth perspective, we're such a large generation and we do have the power to have some impact on our government and corporations. And so whenever we see something that is unjust or is not working towards these goals, we do have the power to put pressure on them to change it, whether that's going out for protest or petitioning or just voting. I'm going to be of voting age soon. I'm very excited to be able to be part of that. And there are lots of ways that we can use our voices to uphold these goals.
Matt, from your perspective, both at HRSA and as a citizen, what advice or how would you urge action on the part of our co-Philadelphians?
Yeah, I think, I certainly agree with Kira and Sophia's points, and from my perspective, businesses are listening, and, the way that people decide to spend their money, or, what they demand of the companies that they support through their purchases, through, where they go to eat or shop, I think it makes a big difference in that, if we can align with those values that we care about, like sustainability, I think that can have a very big impact.
Well, I want to thank our panel, and I'm going to ask you one last question. And the question is this: given all that we've heard so far and all that you know, how optimistic or pessimistic are you that we will succeed in achieving the ambitious goals that are laid out in the SDGs?
I think one of the hardest barriers is awareness. And once we can get over that, which I think we are, and people are becoming more and more aware of these sustainable development goals. And, I think that once we overcome that, it's really about individuals on the day-to-day, maybe identifying one or two sustainable development goals that really resonates with them. If they can take small steps every day, I think collectively that can have a big impact. So I'm optimistic, John.
Okay. Kira.
Well, I really I want to be optimistic. I am optimistic about all the changes that are happening, particularly in the business community. I think that is very new and exciting, and business has a lot of power. My hope is that as there is more awareness among citizens, that it's not just that we do our own local things that we need to do to help to achieve them, but that we also hold our governments accountable, that we really realize that this is a collective action. And I think if we do that, we can achieve them. I do think 2030 is ambitious, so I'm okay if it doesn't happen by 2030. I just would like to see many of these things be solved, especially the things we know how to solve in my lifetime. So I'm optimistic that we can, that the will and the desire is there, and that we'll put our money and our votes behind it to get these things solved.
Now, Sophia, the impatience of your generation, I think, is palpable for all to see. Are you optimistic or are you pessimistic?
I'm somewhere in between. I think we'll get there eventually, but it's really hard to, while we do have this urgency to it, we don't necessarily see the effects that not reaching these goals have yet, and we'll only start to see it significantly and feel that true urgency when it's a little bit too late. So I think we definitely will achieve them at some point. It just, to me, it's hard to know if we're going to do it soon enough. And I really do like that the goals have such a broad range, because thinking internationally, the U.S. is very privileged to be able to even think about some of these goals, where for some countries, environmental sustainability is just not the top priority right now. And to think about the ways that governments are running and equity are also, I'm really glad that those are in there so that we can eventually work towards all of these. And so I think we'll get there eventually, but I just hope it's soon enough.
So, well, thank you, panel. And I guess I would simply say in conclusion that the overall message that I've heard is that we have a lot of work to do, and that achieving the SDGs is an all-hands exercise. So to those of you who are listening, thank you for listening to this panel. I hope you found it educational and interesting. And if you'd like more information about the Sustainable Development Goals here in Philadelphia, you can log on to www.globalphiladelphia.org/SDG. Thank you and goodbye.